All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to start a new lesson about classifying organisms. In other words, there are nearly 9 million different kinds of living things in this world that God has created, which is just mind blowing if you think about it. Um, there are obviously probably quadrillions, if not more, of actual living things here on our Earth. But as far as like different kinds or different species, there are almost 9 million that we know of. And then there are undoubtedly some that we do not know of as well and have not discovered yet. And so scientists need a way of classifying them or organizing them or putting them into groups in order to understand them and study them and talk about them and things. So we're going to talk about how scientists have come up with this system and how it has changed over the course of history. And so here we go. So we're going to start by going back in time to around 350 BC to the time of the Greek philosopher Aristotle. He was one of the first, at least that we know of, who wrote about this idea of classifying or organizing animals or organisms, actually. As a great thinker, he observed the world around him, the natural world, and came to the conclusion that you could basically put all living things into one of two categories. Everything was either an plant or an animal, one or the other. We now know, because we have a lot more technology and the ability to discover more things, that perhaps this is not the best way to organize it. But from what he could see outside, I mean, if any of us went outside and started looking around at all the living things around us, we would probably pick the same two categories as well. Everything's either a plant or an animal. Those are the obvious ones. Well, that system lasted for about 2,000 years or so, and then along came a gentleman by the name of Carolus Linnaeus in the 1700s, as well as some of his colleagues. And they came up with this idea that, yes, there are these two main groups, but we're going to give those groups kind of an official name, kingdoms. So he was a doctor, a Swedish physician. He was also a botanist, which means he was very interested in studying plants. And so he knew a lot about humans, knew a lot about plants, and so he also realized in looking around at all the living things in the world around him that yes, it looked like you would say everything is either a plant or an animal, but he also noticed that you could take plants and animals and put them into kind of even smaller groups or other groupings. And so he actually made the effort to go ahead and uh, do something a little beyond. I'm going to ask you to kind of add this to, uh, let's see, to your notes just a little bit. Um, and that is that he then divided the kingdoms into, I'm just going to make this a little arrow up here, but into smaller categories. Okay, so not only did he have the kingdom of animals, but he may have, had smaller groupings within the kingdom of animals. So he may have had like animals with 4 legs, animals with 2 legs, things of that sort. So he had those two kingdoms, but then he had more categories underneath that. Then we skip a couple hundred more years down the road and we get to Robert Whitaker. Now, he did not, you know, he was not born and died in the same year, 1969. 1969 would be when he and his colleagues published a paper suggesting perhaps a different system, still using the kingdoms, still using some of those smaller groupings to go along with the kingdoms. But he suggested there are actually more than two kingdoms. There's more than just plants and animals. Everything that we had in the category of plants probably shouldn't be in the category of plants, and everything that we had in the category of animals probably shouldn't all be in the same category either. So he was an American biologist who proposed that instead of two kingdoms, that we should actually have 5 kingdoms instead. And so we're going to take a look here. If you look at the screen here, you will notice um, down here at the bottom, this is what Robert Whitaker came up with. Okay. Robert Whitaker came up with what we have known for quite a while as the traditional 5 kingdom system. And this is the system that was taught in school when I was in junior high, all the way up probably till around the time maybe I graduated from college or so. So probably until about 30 years ago. This was the system that we used. We said that there was, yes, there was an animal kingdom. That's right over here. All right, but and there was a plant kingdom, Plantae and Animalia. Those are just the Latin names for animal and plant. But Robert Whitaker added a fungi kingdom because, frankly, although fungi have quite a lot of things in common with plants, technically they're quite different as well. And so he said that plants are organisms that use photosynthesis, whereas fungi, although they have many similarities, do not actually use photosynthesis. And then there were some other differences too. Um, we know a lot more about microscopic organisms, tiny one-celled organisms as well. And so he came up with kingdoms that would fit those one-celled organisms, Protista and Monera. Well, about 30 years ago, scientists decided, you know what? Yeah, sure. We've got all these kingdoms, although we really think we need to add a 6th one. We're going to take Monera and kind of divide that up into 2 eubacteria and archaebacteria. And we actually took a few protists and moved those over as well because they didn't necessarily fit into the protista category as well as we thought they did. And so scientists came up with 6 kingdoms, but they said, you know what, even with these 6 kingdoms, we can actually say that all of these kingdoms, Protista, Plantae, Fungi, and Animalia, actually all have something in common as well. And so we're going to take those 6 kingdoms and we're going to actually make a category that's above that, that's bigger than that. And they are going to belong to the domain Eukarya. So we now have a domain and kingdom system for our organisms. Eukarya just means that they are made up of cells that have organelles. Now, if you were a PCA in 5th grade, then you know that often there's that other fun song, cells are made of organelles. Well, the truth is not all cells are made of organelles. The ones that make up protists and plants and fungi and animalia, yes, most of those cells have organelles, and they are called eukaryotic cells, and therefore those organisms are in the domain Eukarya. However, bacteria and archaebacteria, they are made up of cells that do not have organelles. They're called prokaryotic cells, and so they're in different domains. All right, so now we have domains and kingdoms. In fact, we have 6 different kingdoms now, as we mentioned a few minutes ago, with eubacteria, archaebacteria, protista, fungi, plantae, and animalia. Um, and not only that, but we take those 6 kingdoms, and here are all the levels of classification. So we have your domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. Basically, we're starting with one giant category and breaking it down into smaller and smaller categories. So it might be like, for instance, if we took a category of we'll say our first category is going to be all the students of the world. Okay. And then we're going to say all the students of the United States of America. Okay, so we're going to take that category of all the students of the world, and then we're going to take one smaller category out of there. So we could break it down into students of different countries, so we'll stick with students of the United States of America. And then we could narrow it down to students of New Hampshire. And then perhaps we could narrow it down to maybe students who are in private Christian schools in New Hampshire. And then maybe we say students in Portsmouth Christian Academy. Okay, we keep narrowing it down. They all have things in common, but we're narrowing it down to smaller and smaller groups of people. So this one was students in Portsmouth Christian Academy, number 5. Let's say our sixth one is students in the lower school of Portsmouth Christian Academy. And let's say then we get down to students in 7th grade in the lower school of Portsmouth Christian Academy. And then we finally get down to an individual person. Okay, so we just keep narrowing it down further and further and further. And that's the same thing that scientists have done in making all of these different groups. So let's take a dolphin, for instance. All right. A dolphin is in the domain Eukarya. So in your notes in the second column at the bottom of the page, you're going to be writing in these green words, green underlined words. So this bottlenose dolphin here happens to belong to the domain Eukarya. Well, guess what? So do you. Okay. And then this dolphin also belongs to the kingdom animal, okay, which is a part of the domain Eukarya. Well, so do humans. Humans are also in the domain Eukarya and kingdom animal. Uh, this dolphin is in the phylum Chordate. Okay, the phylum Chordate. So are you. It simply means that you are a eukaryotic animal that has a backbone. All right, a spinal cord. Um, this dolphin's also then in the class mammal. Well, so are you. You are a eukaryote that is an animal that has a backbone and mammary glands. All right. And then the dolphin is in the order Cetacea. Well, you are not. Okay. And then the order Cetacea gets broken down into smaller categories, including the family Dolphinidae, which is the category that this dolphin is in. And then the family Dolphinidae, okay, that's obviously where we get the name dolphin from, but there are different kinds of dolphins as well. So the family Dolphinidae gets broken down into the genus Tursiops. And then there are different kinds of Dolphinidae tersiops, and so that genus gets broken down into different categories, including the species of Truncatus. And that would be the specific kind of dolphin that we have. All right. Well, we could go through and we could keep talking about this dolphin, and we could call it the Eukarya animal chordate mammal Cetacea Dolphinidae tersiops truncatus. We could give it that name, but that would be a really long name. So actually, um, uh, we talked about Carolus Linnaeus before, who lived in the 1700s, and Carolus Linnaeus came up with an idea of how to name living things so that everybody in the world, no matter what language you speak, would know what kind of living thing you are talking about when you use that particular name. Because you can imagine, even in English, for panther, we have different names for it, whether it be a panther or jaguar or whatever. But then, if you speak French, then it's something else, and somebody else speaks Russian, and it's something else, and somebody else speaks Korean, and it's something else, and somebody else speaks Chinese, and it's something else. Well, scientists decided to come up with a system that they could all use. And this was called binomial nomenclature. Binomial means that it has two names. All right. Nomenclature just means a system of naming things. So binomial nomenclature is a system of naming things with two names that Carolus Linnaeus came up with. By coming up with these scientific names, it meant that there would be a lot less confusion because there would be one official unique name for each species of organism. So let's take a look at uh, these names here. They could be scientific names, except for some of them are written correctly and some of them are written incorrectly. Take just a moment to take a look and see if you can figure out what makes it correct or incorrect. You can pause the video for a moment and see if you can figure that out. All right, well, perhaps you've joined back with us again. And we're going to take a look at what are the rules for scientific names. Well, here are our 4 rules. Every scientific name has to have 2 words, and we're very specific on what those 2 words are. The first word is the name of the genus that the organism is a part of. Remember, every organism is a part of a domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. So the first word is the genus. The second word is the species. That's the first rule. The second rule is that a scientific name, whenever it is written or typed, needs to be italicized or underlined. Most of the time, we use italics if we are typing, and we underline if we are handwriting, but that isn't true all of the time. But most of the time it is. It has to be one or the other. Third rule is that the name needs to either be Latin or Greek, or we can take words that are not Latin and kind of make them sound Latin. We call it Latinizing a word. All right, so for instance, if I was going to name something after myself, and I want to use the name Jen, instead of using the name Jen, which is not very Latin, I might go with Genia or Genius or Genus or something to that effect. The fourth rule is that the first letter of the genus is capitalized. So the first letter of the first name is always capitalized. There are no other capital letters. Well, where did the scientific names come from? They can come from all kinds of places. For instance, we might use a word that helps to describe what that organism looks like, or some feature of that organism. That's a pretty popular way of naming things. So if a scientist discovers a new plant that happens to have large flowers, perhaps the species name will be grandiflora. Okay. Sometimes it's named after where the organism was discovered. If it was discovered in America, we can take America and make it sound Latin by saying Americana or Americus or something like that. Could be named in honor of a person, either the person who discovered it or somebody that that person admires or something like that. And so you see the example there with Wilson and how it's been Latinized. Let's take a look at these words here. You may have been given either paper or a page in your class notebook where you can indicate whether these names are written correctly or incorrectly, but we'll do a couple together real quickly. Let's take a look at number 1. Number 1, you will notice that it is actually not written correctly. It follows 3 out of the 4 rules. It does not follow the rule that talks about the first word, the genus name, needing to be capitalized. So the S in Spizella should be capitalized. If we look at number 4, you'll notice that that one is written correctly. It actually follows all 4 of the rules for scientific names. If you have the page in your class notebook, or you have a piece of paper that that happens to have these names on there, please go ahead and complete that at this time. You can pause the video. If not, you may continue on to the next part of the video. The last thing that we're going to talk about is something called the dichotomous key. All right, a dichotomous key is basically a tool that's used by people to try and figure out if you find either an organism or a part of an organism that you are not sure exactly what it is. Scientists have put together these things called dichotomous keys that help us to identify things. So di means two, dichotomous means like 2 pathways or 2 choices. And so this is a key that gives us descriptions or paths in pairs that can be used to identify something that we don't know. So for instance, if I enlarge this picture that's at the bottom of the screen, and we take a look at this here, let's look at leaf A for just a moment. You'll notice I've circled it there. Dichotomous key, we always start with the first two statements. So we start at the number 1, and we need to make a choice. We need to decide, is this a needle leaf or a non-needle leaf? In this case, this is a non-needle leaf. It is not made up of a bunch of little needles. Letter D or letter E, those would be needle leaves. This is not a needle leaf. We sometimes call it a broadleaf instead. In this case, they call it a non-needle leaf. And so if we look across at this, we can see that if it is a non-needle leaf, then it tells us to go to number 3. So we're going to go down here to number 3. We need to decide if it is a simple leaf or a compound leaf. Simple leaf is made of a single leaf, compound made of many leaflets. For instance, G would be a compound leaf, or B would be a compound leaf. This is a simple leaf, letter A. So simple leaves, it tells us to go to 4. 4 asks us if it is a smooth-edged leaf or a jagged-edged leaf. This one appears to be fairly smooth, so we're going to go to 5. And 5 asks us if the leaf edge is smooth or the leaf edge is lobed. Lobed would be like letter F, perhaps. In this case, it is smooth, and so if we look across, it no longer tells us to go somewhere. Instead, it tells us the name of the tree that that leaf goes to, which is a magnolia tree. If we wanted to then start to do letter B, we would go back to the beginning. We would go back to number 1, and we would begin all over again, following the steps each step of the way. All right, ladies and gentlemen, our next class, we will do an activity having to do with dichotomous keys. I hope you have a great day.